to me, out of the blue, when we were just starting, I mean, really just starting, Candice invites me to come up and talk to a group in Maine. And it was just a neat experience. I'd never been to Maine before, but my wife's family's from Maine. And so we brought Nan and you and Ian and we brought Ian and Colin and my mother-in-law and my wife and had a wonderful time. And it's all thanks to Candice. And I was presenting with Phyllis Fisher. I remember that. I'm a teacher, so I'm not a professional presenter, so it probably showed. But I had a great time, met great people. And I discovered, the best thing I discovered about Candice's Maine is the people in Maine are an awful lot like the people in Florida. And so you go, how can that be? And that is, we have the same attitude toward tourists. As soon as they saw I had New York plates, they said, wow, a rental car with New York plates? No, it was Massachusetts plates. It was Massachusetts plates. They go, a rental car with Massachusetts plates, you better follow every single rule you've got going. And that's where New York comes in and say, yeah, I know those rules. That's what Florida does with New York plates. Every cop, they know you have money in your pocket. They're going to pull you over for anything. So had a wonderful time with Candice in Maine, and even have a question somewhere along as Candice introduces, and she can go anywhere she wants. This is a happy hour. How did you find out about Great Leaps? Was it through Cecil Mercer?
Wow, here's the story. And just a little more background about me. I am from Maine. I've lived most of my life in Maine, except when I was in Connecticut for a couple of years going to school, and then in Boston for almost 10 years, where I got my doctorate in communication disorders and language-based learning disabilities, and worked with college students, graduates, and undergraduates for about 10 years. So I've kind of worked the whole preschool right up through adulthood. And I just keep learning all the time, and always seem to be, again, gaining new knowledge and broadening my own vision of these little tapes that we would put in, slide them in. And I would often obtain tapes from various conferences. And I was doing a lot of consulting all over Maine, spending a lot of time on the road. And so I had a lot of time to listen to these tapes. So I had this one tape I put in. I can't remember, Ken, which conference it was. It certainly wasn't IDA. It may have been DLD or one of the others, CLD.
I would bet it was it LDA Chicago?
I can't remember.
Yeah, that was a Cecil talk. That was a big one. It really impacted the whole country.
Yeah. So I listened to this man, Cecil Mercer, and knew of his work and his textbooks and just a wealth of knowledge. And he gave this presentation on Great Leaps. So I'm driving along and going like, this makes so much sense. I've got to find out about this. So I think when I got home, I got in touch with you, Ken. I don't know if you had email back. I don't know how, but anyways, I got in touch with you and wanted to know more about the program. And you probably even sent me some sample things to look at. And I started to haul those around to all the schools I went to. Yeah. And so different schools began to purchase the program and began to use Great Leaps in their classrooms. And, a couple of stories I have a lot of different stories to share, even to this day, of kids that will say, well, I think he really should have written the sentence this way, or he should have changed the story and done this. I will write to him, tell him that,
Tell me, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, he needs a sequel to this story. We need more, they just wonderful, marvelous things.
I've got to write more about my Nessie dog, because that's a beautiful, wonderful Scotty dog. And your group has written me more than once, but every single kid that has written me about my dog Nessie and what happened, I've written them back in person as best I could.
Yeah.
And so it's so neat for people to do that.
Yeah, and they love that story. And again, oftentimes, again, changes like, ooh, that's gross, but they love it.
That's the idea.
And one girl, there's one story that you write that, you know, she's not from the South, but when she read it, I am telling you, she took on the Southern accent that was unbelievable. I was just like, I'm like listening to her going like, wow, where did that come from? And she said, I don't know, I just started to read and it just came. So she was asked to go back and read that story over and over and over. And this amazing accent would come out.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That was going to be my, instead of Great Leaps reading, I was going to come out with Great Leaps talking. Teaching Yankees to talk.
Well, she'd be able to help. She was amazing. So I began to, again, take these materials all around to these different schools. And one day, and some of you may have heard this story, but one day I went into a school and this young man, it was middle level, 6th grader, he came up to me and he kind of started tugging on my shirt. And I said, yes. He said, you know what? You know what? And I didn't know what, but I said, no, like what? He said, that leaps. That leaps. I said, yes. He said, I read my first book ever, 6th grade. I said, tell me about it. He said, well, it's that leaps. You know, it's that leaps. I started doing that leaps every day. And now I read my first book. So that, you know, just, I'd never even met this young man before. And what a beautiful story and testimony to this kid. He just knew that I was the person who had showed the teacher the Great Leaps, and so wanted me to know the impact it had on his life. And another story, because I've used it with tons of kids and tons of teachers, but a young man that in 3rd grade really couldn't read much at all, but had somehow masked his lack of reading and ability to read. And I came into the picture as a consultant, and he got really angry at me because I said, you really don't know these letters and sounds and things. And he'd been able to kind of mask it with people. He was highly verbal. So we had to start in with a lot of basic reading skills and multisensory instruction. He began to move forward and then introduce them to Great Leaps. And he was one of the students that was in your original, that video that we did years ago. And he was so proud of all the progress that he made that when I asked him if he would be in this video, and his dad was a pilot, so his dad could fly him down to Rockland, Maine, where you were doing the taping, he was just so proud of all of his reading that he agreed to do it, where for years he had been trying to hide all of his reading issues. So those are just some of the, the kids that just really stand out to me. And I think the other thing I'd like to mention is just how generous you've been all these years. I'd be going to conferences and I would mention it to Ken, and I'd arrive wherever this conference was going to be. It could be New York, all over the place. And there would be, because I do like raffles. So if teachers ask questions, I'd draw things and they would get prizes. So I get there expecting like, one Great Leaps thing. And there would be like 2 boxes filled with materials. And people just left thrilled because they, and then they started using the program. And then of course schools then said, oh, this is great. It's working. Let's buy more. But I would show up and they'd say, all these boxes came for you. Open them up and there they'd be.
Candice, so, I'm an organic gardener. I know what seeds do.
Yeah.
You can't eat all the black-eyed peas. You got to save some of them to plant.
Well,
so you plant a few, and if you believe. But you brought up one point that hit me personally, and Colin will relate to this too. Probably all of us instructors will relate. Those of us with disabilities, and I really don't go flying that flag a lot. I hear other people who are accomplished in my field flying the flag that I'm disabled and all of this stuff. Well, I'm not disabled, never felt disabled, but I had a problem and didn't know it as a kid. and you were talking about the child hiding it.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a nice, good IQ, and you have somehow been injured, and I will call dyslexia an injury. Much like I probably, it could be anything from breech birth to being dropped on my head by my mama to being hit in the head by a hoe with Kobe. I lived in a tough area, you know, I had some concussions and it's impacted my whole life, but yeah, hide it. And I want every instructor here still working with children to know and to spread that idea that we're not cheaters. We're hiding a disability because the other alternative is punishment. If I have my own disability makes spatial relations virtually impossible and directions virtually impossible, and I'm putting in a drafting class in middle school and junior high, there's no way in hell. Oh yes, there is a way in hell. It's called cheating. But when you mention the child hiding it, and that's my own grandchild that Colin taught to read. It's a perfectly normal, protective human behavior to hide your disability. And it may be strange in this world we're in now to call a disability an ability, because I know full well this is the disability. It didn't do me any good. It was horrid. And thanks to good people, including my mother, you learn to overcome, and I didn't get special help. But how old was that boy that had been hiding it all this year and you caught him? You undressed him.
Yeah. Well, he was third grade when you met him, when he was in the video. It was at least 2 years later. So he was late elementary, early middle level in that filming that you did. You came to Rockland, Maine and did the filming.
That's a funny story, but that's a whole group from Utah.
Huh.
It had nothing to do with us. I forget what the name of it was. You know, it was a group from Utah, and they went all over the country filming. So that was pretty neat. I still don't think I could afford to travel much around the country then. But
the School Improvement Network.
Right, it's a school, and they're probably still around. But that was kind of neat that they went all over the country. They went to North Carolina, Maine, Florida. They got some good interviews with Cecil Mercer, and if anybody here can find any videos or even recordings of Cecil's talks, he had one general talk that he gave that was powerful. No one appears to have recorded it, and I'm still on the look for it because he's a huge influence in my life.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting. Candice, I had a question, and like referring back to that and working, I'm sure you've seen that a lot of times with your students, and that, you know, their ability to cope with the disability or with wherever they're lacking. And I guess I'm just curious, like, in the different ways where you've seen that maybe present itself, or like what kind of different ways you've seen students, like, you know, make up for or hide or kind of, you know, work around, you know, whatever their disabilities are over the years.
Yeah, I think, you know, different individuals obviously present in different ways. Of course, one of the ones is to act out, to make it be a behavioral issue, because somehow that to act out in front of your classmates might be more acceptable than them realizing that you can't read.
It pulls the attention like somewhere else, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I can be, and then the teacher gets mad at me, and then I get out in the hall. So I'm saved once again from having to read anything. So one thing is it often morphs into the behavioral issues, and then people begin to think everything's behavior, and they never look really at the student and their learning and what's really happening. It's just sometimes easier for people to say, well, it's just the behavior. Like the other day I was in an IEP meeting, and they decided the presenting issue was this young person's attention deficit disorder and not the learning issue. Well, I did not agree. To me, the learning issue was impacting the attentional piece. I mean, he definitely had attentional issues, but he was constantly being asked to read things and he can't read, or write things, to sit and write an essay or, you know, a story, and he can't spell. So of course he's going to be nudgy and up out of his chair and seemingly distractible. So one is the behavior route. The other route is the being very, very good route. And I often call this the good little girl syndrome, because I see it a lot more in girls than in boys. There are many, many young girls who are struggling in learning and reading and writing and language issues. And but they act very good. They watch to see what other people are doing. And so like a second or two later, they do the same thing. They really key into good behaviors. And if you behave really well, often people just assume you're just shy. And that's why maybe you don't want to read. Or you'll have kids say to the teacher, well, I really want to write this at home. I'll do this at home. And they do it in such a sweet little way that people go, oh, okay. I had a niece who had some very significant motor issues and writing issues. And so what she would do is she would, when it was time to share her story, she would stand up with her paper, like in a notebook, and she would deliver this unbelievable story. And this would go on week after week, and everyone loved her stories because they were just rich and this amazing language. And sometimes she'd even have a sequel that she would come with. Well, then one day the teacher discovered she had written nothing the whole year, just, you know, it was nothing. So, but she was so well behaved and sweet and nice. So sometimes that, that certainly happens. Other kids, again, will try to mask by, unfortunately, we call it cheating or doing whatever, it's survival. Sometimes just to survive, they will copy, they will do different things. So that's, I don't find that as much. I find more either the real acting out behavior or the really good, quiet, I'm getting it done, or I'll turn it in later, or a story a young man shared with me, which it's a pretty amazing story. Growing up, he could not read very well, and they always did the round robin reading, and he was always in the lowest group. And so he would try to figure out when he was going to read. So he'd try to read ahead, you know, and every now and then he'd realize he'd kind of missed the boat. And, you know, he hadn't studied the right sentence. So of course that's when, can I go to the bathroom? That's another behavior. Can I go to the bathroom? Can I go to the bathroom? Yeah, that's a big one. So that worked a few times. And one day he realized he was really off the mark. So he got up, asked if he could go to the bathroom, and he went home. He did not really learn to read and write until college.
Oh, wow.
And now he has his master's.
You brought up one incredible point that we really need to share, that in behavior most people don't get, concerning boys and girls. And most of my work has been in the work of incredible abuse and neglect. We have found girls implode, boys explode, and of course it's not 100%. So those that implode do not bother anybody. So the poor sexually abused girl that is in the midst of hell right now hides, dresses inappropriately, makes herself ugly, does all kinds of things that do not bother the teacher. The boy throws things. So the boys in the world of severe emotional disturbance get attention 7-to-1 over the imploding girls. Are, rather than even use boys and girls now, let's use those who explode versus those who implode. But what you described, there's no it almost needs to be written in the literature, because you described acceptable imploding. Acceptable imploding would be, I'm going to smile, I'm going to be
The
nice.
masking with the good behavior. Yeah, I found that really
Yeah,
fascinating too.
boy, I mean, what you just brought up there, Candice, is in the world of behavior and in the world of maybe even not as, we learn a lot from those who've been extremely abused, so we can take that into the world of lesser handicapping conditions. But I think you just described a wonderful thing we need to look at, and it's like acceptable implosion. I mean, that is just, you got my brain twirling on that as I watch it and what you just described. It was a beautiful description of, wow. And I bet my own granddaughter, Linda, fit into that. She's so talented in language and dance and other things. Nobody cared. She didn't read.
Yeah, I was gonna mention to just to tie it to Linda as well, who's my own niece, is that she was always like very ahead language wise. She was always very talkative, very smart, understood like sarcasm and things like that at a very early age. And you know, we did identify, I guess, in our own house playing Monopoly when she was doing a lot of avoidance behaviors to avoid like reading the cards or things like that. But yeah, I could definitely imagine with somebody who's very likable and they, you know, they do everything to be to kind of get more leniency in a way by being, you know, fitting the that really positive and like well-behaved mold.
It works. Exploding doesn't work. So maybe girls are a whole lot smarter than us. It works. It really does.
Okay, reality is we are.
How can I love women? How can I object? I really love kids. I really love kids is what's it. But this whole, it's neat. What's neat about a happy hour is what just happened. It is kind of, we start thinking of, boy, you mentioned that, and that fit right into my whole career into severes. But now you're talking about very nuanced behaviors that fit right into that implosion pattern. And I think I could be wrong, but listen to how we identify the implosive behaviors and then misidentify the appropriate solution. And you caught that. You caught that this is not happening with this child because of, let's say, hyperkinesis. It's happening because the child can't read. And so we get a lot of that, and we miss it. And you mentioned a girl syndrome, and I'm wondering if you've seen this syndrome. I used to call it the third grade girl gifted syndrome because I got too many of them. It's the little girl made all A's through first, second grade, all A's, perfect child, perfect student. Third grade, child falls apart. I started seeing this over and over and over. It wasn't happening with boys. Probably could be happening with boys, but never saw it. And the girls were always real high IQ, 120s to 140s. And the identification from the parents would say, the teachers are saying, oh, the hormones are flowing. She doesn't, meaning she's growing up. She's interested in boys. She just wants to be social, you know, and that's why her grades have fallen apart. It's her fault. What we began seeing is when you move from third grade reading, little books like that, to fourth grade reading, little big books like that, you've introduced conjunctions, prepositional phrases, high frequency words. The kid can't read. You could figure everything out, especially if a little bit of phonics you got, when you can see subject, verb, object. You can answer any question they throw. That's third grade. You start throwing in the complex sentences.
I think you may have just cut out there. It looks like Jess is on it. But I guess for the time being, I did have a follow-up, Candice, to your explaining the different kind of masking behaviors is how then on the other side of that, when you're working with them, how does your approach differ based on, you know, the kind of student?
Well, my approach has always been
You and you.
Can I sit?
Yep, sit.
Oh,
Stop.
sorry.
That chair leans back.
Go see if mine comes back up.
Sorry.
Really though, that one leans back. Don't lean back too far in that chair.
I hope that wasn't a Macintosh major crash.
Very
I
good.
love my computer and everything I own is on it.
Sorry, Dad. What I just asked Candice though as the follow-up was just how her approach kind of differs, or you know, in working with those different types of students. Since I didn't know when you're going to come back, so
that, and I have a couple of things I want to share too about different profiles of individuals. I've always had a very strong, has to earn my respect. Don't agree with that. It's like the respect is there. There might be moments that you can unearn things like, wait a minute, you know, that's not okay. But first of all, it's that respect, and I'm honest.
mm-hmm.
Candice, you just said an incredibly important thing for those students we work with behaviorally. You may be the very first adult in their life who ever talked with them rather than at them, that respected them and their needs at that high a level. We just throw the world, and when the child is quote unquote a loser, it appears to be worse and worse. But that very center, boy, this sounds psychodynamic, not behavioral, but that very center of establishing an honest working rapport with the kid, that unique soul, and appreciating the uniqueness and wonderfulness of who you're working with is powerful. And that's just, and I think that may be a whole secret of a lot of our successes is just respect.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think so. Respect and kindness are huge. I wanted to go back for a minute about these kind of like third, fourth grade girls, and often it will include boys too. But I think what happens with a lot of students, particularly students that have a really good language system intact, they can learn to read because they understand how language works and how sentences work, and they use all of their skills in doing that, and can be pretty good. But then they reach a certain level where the whole structure of books is so much more complicated, and they're running into a lot of multi-syllable words. And what happens is they begin to meet a lot of words that they've never met before, and they literally do not know how to decode. They don't know how to sound them out. So, or they plowed through these other books, and now all of a sudden you're expected to read faster and with greater fluency. And that can be the issue, that all of a sudden, oh my gosh, everyone's up the ante, the sentences are longer, they're more complex, there are all these words I've never met before. And so that's another reason you'll see that difficulty happening. And then another thing that you may see every now and then, just a kind of a thing to think about, is in middle level, I've seen, I say girls only because this is where I've seen it happen a lot, and because I've seen a lot of girls unidentified, again, because they're particularly good at masking. When I worked college level with students, I worked with many more women than men because they started coming out of the woodwork. It was like, oh my gosh. And what had happened with a number of these young women is they started off good early language skills, did well with early reading. Then when they got to a point where there was a lot more figurative language and inferencing, that's where I saw a number of people begin to break down in their skills. And one example I have of that, a story of a young woman I worked with, so bright. Oh my gosh, this young woman was so bright. But one day she came to me and we were talking and I said, oh, it's your birthday tomorrow. And she said, she looked at me and she started crying. And I'm thinking, 19? Well, that's not really any age to cry about. I thought, well, what's going on? I said, what? Tell me what's going on. And she looked at me and she said, I'm going to get those cards. I said, tell me more. What kind of cards? She said, you know those cards that you open up and everybody laughs? She said, I laugh. I have no idea what the cards are about. She didn't understand figurative language. She didn't understand jokes, implied meanings. Although if you spoke with her, you never, ever would have suspected any type of language issue. And she said, if I'm really brave and there's somebody I really trust, later in the evening, I'll find somebody and ask them to please explain to me what is funny about those cards. But that's why she dreaded her birthday every year. And so we needed to do some very specific work on her reading comprehension and just social comprehension to help her understand that language. And I have found, over the years, often that good early language development, but a lot of individuals hit that wall when it comes to those higher level language skills. Build in that extra inferencing and figurative language. And do you know what this means? Because that's really, really important. And you're going to find the number of students that struggle with that language. And that would also link to a lot of your behavior concerns, in that a lot of these kids with those kind of higher level language issues struggle behaviorally because they're the ones that will, they'll hear a joke, maybe inappropriate, but they hear everybody laugh. So then they turn around and tell it to another group of people who they should not be telling that joke, but everyone laughed, but they have no idea what the joke is about. Or some of the sayings that kids are using, because that changes all the time. They'll begin to use some of these sayings. I can't even think of any right now, but, and they haven't interpreted them. Again, they've seen kids use them, cool kids use them, so they start to use them and use them inappropriately. So then again, they get into issues. So when you're doing things, any intervention, but in the Great Leaps, specific to people that's mainly what you're doing, really pay attention to the language and making sure kids are understanding the abstractness of things and multiple word meanings and, again, figurative language. And sometimes you do a little probing, you realize, oh, again, that masking, they really don't understand. So another thing to really pay attention to.
Do you think that child was on the spectrum?
No. Kids on the spectrum really struggle with all that, what we call right hemisphere mediated language. So if you ever study any of Gardner's stuff, he's amazing on right hemisphere stuff. We always think all language is left hemisphere. It's not true. A lot of those higher level language skills, inferencing, multiple meaning, figurative language, a good part of that is all mediated by the right hemisphere. And that's why individuals on the spectrum, because right hemisphere, that right hemisphere stuff is really tough for them, why they don't understand that language. But no, this young woman, it was just part of her development that her language kind of stalled out, but no way on the spectrum. And I've seen that with other, but definitely people on the spectrum. Yes, Lisa?
I had a student as well who, it took him about 9 months of us working together. His dad and mom were there the first time he actually got a joke. He had no clue. And this was not this was not like your kiddo, not on the spectrum at all. He just couldn't process jokes. They made no sense to him.
Yep.
Funny Fridays fell kind of flat with this kid for a while.
Yeah, and you can get some really different types of behaviors going on when that happens. And one is that the kids feel stupid. It's like everybody else getting it, and what's wrong with me? And then you get, again, all those other things that go along with when I don't feel good about myself and I look and what are they getting that I'm not getting? Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
that's a great example.
I had a question. This is kind of just because of you know, my own thing, and it made me think when you're talking about the round robin reading, and or we used to do like popcorn reading, and my thing was always anxiety. I had such anxiety. I would do exactly what you said. I would practice the lines over and over again. I'd make sure I had it down pat, and I would, you know, I would nail it because I was obviously just a fine reader, but my anxiety was so high that it
Wow.
would freak me out. And so I guess I just kind of a question maybe in how you work with students that have like really high anxiety about things, and how you kind of help maybe you know, ease that pressure or help build their kind of confidence up.
Well, Colin, that's a good one for me because I taught middle school. They gave me middle school literature for non-readers, which is a wonderful class to teach, 17 to 20 kids at a time in a literature class, and they cannot, the reading levels in the group ran from the absolute 0 to 4th and 5th grade level. And I decided to use, there's no structured class you could purchase or even do. So I found the great short stories of the world, and the round robin reading can be a disaster. But if you know every kid and their reading level, and they can track when I call a student to read, every time they can read it. I know that. And so I had high attention levels, low anxiety, a lot of fun and description as we went through the great short stories of the world, where I would read, then I'd have one of them read. And the major problem I'd had would be teaching tracking. So if your turn comes up, and if I knew a kid couldn't track, he would never get called on. And you then had the option of reading further if you wanted to. So round robin can work, but you really have to have a teacher in that field that knows what they're doing, knows their children, knows how to intervene early in a sequence of disaster so it isn't a disaster, and to keep things moving and keep things flowing. But it can work. But I see no method out there right now to help teachers in how to do a too large class of reading dysfunctional children and yet get that language component that they need. We get, after 3rd grade, I think you get 75% of your new language from your reading. And our kids can't read.
Lavinia, you had something
Yeah.
to add, sorry.
I just wanted to ask about round robin reading. I thought it had been discredited long ago. I was actually a very good reader, and so I would read the whole chapter to prepare for my sentence. But why do we force kids to do cold readings? Even when you go for an audition to be in a performance, you have a chance to read it silently to prepare. First of all, isn't our goal silent reading? And you know, this whole thing about, you know, the round robin reading, like you have to read it cold and understand it and have the deep meaning and stuff like that. I mean, it seems unfair to everybody to have to do those cold readings.
I think
Yeah.
there's a lot. I think there's a lot less of that going on now. I think there are some classrooms that still do some of it, but you're right. I mean, that's really been discredited. But some people still persist, or in some cases, kids know each other so well and the reading materials are actually very much at their level and they're comfortable doing that. But asking students to cold read can be an absolute disaster. And so there is a lot less.
It's also torture for the listener.
Yep.
I mean, it's only, you know, I mean, to have your class sit through this is torture on two sides.
You can work around that. The idea of a cold read, the idea of a cold read must happen sometimes because we must measure where a child is at. I'll guarantee you,
group in front of other people.
Not in group, that's performance. And as I tried to describe that class I had and was forced into, I had to really know my behaviors to pull that off. So I don't recommend that for everyone. But the idea of a cold read, I think what you're watching is escape behaviors from a long history of punishment, as opposed to the behavior you're wanting itself. The cold read in itself is not punishing. If you eliminate, we have to have the cold read so I can see growth or lack thereof. So I can ascertain the difficulties through error analysis of what's going on. If I eliminate punishers, I have no reluctance at all from my readers on when they get a new passage, because they know the new passage is the method to the next success. And yes, that's not easy to build, and it's a critical part of building.
I mean, what would be the harm of giving them 3 seconds to read it silently and rehearse? I mean, you're still testing comprehension.
I'm not testing comprehension though. I'm testing reading.
But if they prepare, I mean, I always did well because I read the whole chapter in advance. I was scared to read it. You know, I was in the 99th percentile. I was a good reader, but I didn't want to read that sentence, you know, cold. And especially in a second language, man, oh man, those orals in Spanish made me nuts.
But see, that's in front of everybody. I'm going back to the tutoring on the one-on-one.
Okay.
And see, that is not, when you've completely eliminated the punishers, and performance leads to reward, success, and attention, you don't get that angst within you because there's no punishers. If we see, as a tutor, we see that angst, we work early to eliminate it. But I still need the cold read to see where they're at without practice.
Right, and we're talking about, I think, very different things here. There's one, reading in front of other people and just having kids read to understand where their decoding skills are. But I wanted to go back to Colin's question also to add to the, what do you do about anxiety? And just that for some kids, it just, even though they can read something, it just builds. A couple things that I have done. One is I tend to warm up with poetry for some kids because they really like poetry. Poetry has a rhythm to language. So I've been using a number of different really wonderful poems with my students, and they're loving those. So I'll say, well, do you want to start with oh yes, I want to start. And some of these poems they've read 10 times, but they just, each time there's more expression. The other thing, and I don't know if anybody here today is aware of tapping. Tapping in that people do it for people who have gone through trauma. It helps with sickness, it helps with pain, but it's a thing where you tap, and you can look this up. It is absolutely research based, and it shows it really lowers anxiety. It's now becoming a well-known type of intervention, very often used with first responders. And I've done that with a lot of my kids. I will show them how to tap, and sometimes I'll say, well, I can see that anxiety is building. I can hear it in their voice. So we'll say, let's just stop for a minute and let's do some tapping. And the other way to do it is you just you cross your arms, and you can either do like this or like this. And I call it the butterfly. And we just do that, and we breathe in and we breathe out. We breathe in, we close our eyes. Then finally I end it with just a, you know, I call it the butterfly. Your butterfly lands, breathe in, breathe out. But the difference in kids, and this one kid, he'll say, can we do the butterfly, or can we do our tapping? So that's, and you can go online and look at tapping.
Even ask, yeah, I'm definitely gonna look into it. That's fantastic tips. And I loved what you said about poems too, and connecting the rhythm to the language. And with myself as a drummer, that would, I'm sure, have done a really good, you know, benefit to that.
And that's another thing. Sometimes I just start tapping. I just do a rhythmic tap, and you can almost see that anxiety, and it also helps them become more fluent because you're setting that. Some people use the metronome to get the rhythm, and so it's just, let's just tap, which you could do with drumsticks. I mean, anything. So again, that sometimes is a nice quieting, get into a cadence, get into a rhythm, and they forget some of that anxiety.
That's great.
With Great Leaps, another thing I do, I have one kiddo who always wants to start with stories. That's where he wants to start. And if we start with the stories, he does so much better on everything else. He says, I love the stories. So instead of a reward at the end, he wants it at the beginning, and it makes so that I can just hear his voice. So those are some different things. Some kids might just want to tap on their legs and get a rhythm going. Sometimes I have them get out of their seats, and I'll have them do different motor movement things. To be a snake, or I'd be this, be that, move through this. So there are a lot of different things that we can do just to get their brains kind of set. But the tapping is, if you begin to look at that, you can look at videos.
I'm definitely looking that up. Absolutely.
Become a huge fan of tapping for a number of different things. So those are a bunch of different ones that really help.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You bring up tolerance and movement. Behavior teachers are very tolerant of things that don't lead toward violence or possible craziness. And some people are so strict in wanting people's, I think the idea of being tolerant of motor movement, I don't care if you stand up or sit down or when you read, because I come from the behavioral background. And I've watched other people be so strict, they don't know that their strictness is inhibiting the child within that they're working with. And I think, Candice, you described that very, very well, as those needs of the children to be not so restricted when they, quote unquote, read for you.
Lisa, in just a minute, I just want to mention something else about the tapping. This is like being the honest teacher thing. So I realized with this one kid, I start getting anxious before he reads because he's come a long way, but his fluency is still, oh my goodness, it's like, let me like said, it's painful at times. I'm like wanting to just pull the words out of him. So I can sense my own anxiety. So you can just even tap on your own hand like this, or like this, or like this. And so I've started to do that. When he starts to read, I'm just out of view. Well, now I relax. And because I'm relaxing more, he's relaxing. So I try not to show in my face that I'm getting like, oh, I want you to make that leap, or I want you to get that word right. And you try not to, we all do. I'll just try to smile, and that has helped me. So I'm more relaxed. He's more relaxed. So that's another thing to think about as teachers. Lisa.
I want to piggyback off of something that Ken said about extra movement and stuff. I had a kid who got the leap on phonics 79. A phrase is 79, excuse me, that last phrase is probe. Doing the probe like this.
Yeah.
God love him. If he can track while rocking back and forth like that, I don't care. I wouldn't care if he stands on his head and reads. It doesn't bother me. It bothers the parents sometimes when the kid is bouncing around. But on the other side, if they can't read when they're bouncing around, I do point them out to them at the end of the exercise. I'm like, gosh, you lost your place 3 times in that page. You might want to try, I don't know, staying still. I had one 7-year-old who I had stand to yesterday to do her great leaps because she was a squirmy wormy and couldn't stay still on the chair. So you can stand, it's easy enough. And to go off of what you were talking about, I've had kids with anxiety. Usually it's kind of like BD errors. It comes out in the wash. 15 timings a week, really, timings don't have as much zip to them when it comes to anxiety if you've done it 15 times a week. There's only so much you can have anxiety over that before it becomes old hat.
That leads to the neat question that I've been bombarded with for 25 years, is the anxiety producing of a 1-minute timing. And
I just love the timer.
I think it's teacher and adult induced, but it's just an interesting conversation. Those of us in Great Leaps, and the digital is sort of eliminating that, because you don't hear me say stop really, and you don't see that timer. And it's just an interesting question that won't leave me in my lifetime. Is that the idea of 1-minute timings produces the anxiety itself.
Well, I was just going to speak from my own experience, because I, of course, did Great Leaps when I was younger and had that anxiety. And it was, I had a personal, performance thing, right? Where I felt, my expectation of myself and what I felt I had to do was so high that you get, into your own head, and you build this thing up before the timing even starts of like, oh, I got to beat this. I got to be better than yesterday, and that's maybe a little bit different, I guess, in anxiety in a way, or I don't know, I guess it creates it, but that was kind of, in just my own experience, some of what I remember, like when I first started doing, Great Leaps as a kid myself. But
one of the ways I've had of working with that, when people are still using timers, some of the things I've suggested, because some kids you bring, it doesn't matter if you're doing formal testing and anything's timed, they just literally fall apart, is one, I say, get a timer, and this is back before the digital, get a timer that doesn't beep.
mm-hmm.
I hate that. I mean, I don't like that.
Or an app that doesn't beep.
Right, or an app that doesn't beep. The other thing is, I would sometimes suggest, I said, let the kids use the timer. When they're ready to start, they push the button, so put them in control. And that has worked with a lot of kids. And then kids that just absolutely, I'll say, well, back when we used to have clocks on the walls. So I'd say, just look at your clock. You can look up at your clock and time. And then the other thing is, I would just blame Ken. The kids would say, why do we have to? I said, well, I said, the man who wrote the program, and I would explain why we're doing it. But I'd say, I said, I have to do this because if I don't, I'm going to get in trouble. So I would just blame Ken. That's the other way to help.
Mike, I've asked my kids, because I have a lot of kids, and I've asked them all the same question, and none of them would like doing this without the timer, because then you have to read till the bloody end. That's miserable. Are you kidding? I'm like, hey, and they're like, no, we like the timer. And like, some of them look at me like I'm nuts when I tell them. Other kids, I've had tutors, I've had other professionals I've had other professionals telling me that kids don't like the timer and don't like reading for 1 minute only. And I'm like, and they're like, say what?
The reading for 1 minute only brings up an interesting academic question, and it goes both ways. Cecil Mercer and I were not disagreed, which means friendly disagreed, which I love about our community. But to me, when you stop and you mark, and then there's tomorrow, and a child who has always been a failure sees overtly that next day that he or she is faster, is better, that to me is behaviorally far more powerful than me giving you an abstract number. So many in my field, and these people are wonderful experts and have long histories of success, let the child finish the story, or they read the story themselves. To me, for children who have failed and do not believe in themselves, that overt no doubt, timed, period, showing you got faster, can't be argued with. And here's the cool part. I've done my best in many of the stories to have tricks, twists, and endings. So there's a joy if you read the joke to the student, you get all the power of the funny and being the performer. When the student finishes and reads the joke and gets it, it's powerful. That is why I stop them before they've hit the end, knowing full well they're going to hit the end. There's so much behavior here that we could talk for hours on, not just the overt sounds and words, but the behaviors of teaching sounds and words to children who have been long-term failures. It's a real different world. It isn't taking penicillin. It is working with a human soul. Each one in my world made in the very image of God and unique. And it's my job as I'm working with them to build. And when they don't believe in themselves, I have to design and do things within the materials themselves to have that behavioral belief happen. If I have a child who now believes in themselves, who has had a series of successes, we fly, and sometimes it takes 3 weeks, but we'll fly a lot faster than those who deal with just, to me, the overt symbols without the behaviors and relationships.
Yeah. I want to, since we're running up on an hour here, open it up to any questions that anyone has for Candice before we kind of at least close out the official recording. But did anyone have anything they're itching to get Candice's perspective on?
I can go fast and first. Candice, who in all of your world of training and reading and researching, which professional has influenced you the most in your successful career?
Well, I would say the person that's influenced me the most is Dr. Elizabeth Weig, who she was my mentor and primary contact person and professor at Boston University when I was working on my doctorate in language-based learning disabilities. She is brilliant. She helped me really understand the brain and the impact of language on absolutely everything in our lives. And without that background in language development, language differences, brain impacted by any number of things, I doubt that I would be where I am today in my thinking. So it just opened up a whole world to me in understanding, again, about the brain and language. And the other thing that she did for me is I always thought I had a learning disability. I learned to read very early, but I could not decode, and I could not process sounds, and I could not spell. And I went all through college until finally I had a professor say to me, you know, I really like what you say in class, but then I look at your writing, it's like a whole other person. So I had real struggles in writing. I didn't learn to actually decode and learn vowel sounds until my mid-20s when I had to teach reading.
Yeah, wow.
And learned phonemic awareness. So I was even older than that when I couldn't process vowel sounds. They did not exist to me. So one of the other gifts that Elizabeth gave to me, I said to her one day, Elizabeth, do you think I have a learning disability? And she looked at me and she said, oh, my dear, there is no question.
Oh.
So I finally just had that affirmation of like, because I always felt like my brain was so different and oftentimes felt very stupid, very stupid.
I know that.
And I even thought, defending my dissertation, I thought that back then used the term mental retardation, which was a horrible thing, but I thought I thought that I was mentally incompetent as an individual. And again, she put me to ease, but she was the person from whom I learned so much, and it just went across everything else that I ever did. Just
Candice, can you text me her name?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'd love it.
Yeah, she's world renowned in the field of speech and language, and just an amazing, amazing individual that I just honor with my brain and my heart, and would not be where I am today if it were not for her, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Great. And one, I guess, if nobody else has a question, a quick takeaway that I think would be good for people who will watch this is what would be one book that you'd recommend as an educator, somebody that's coming up in the field to read that would be, just very valuable.
Oh, there are so many. Oh my God.
Top 5, maybe.
I've got a whole stack of, I would definitely, any readings that Louisa Moats, M-O-A-T-S, has written. Louisa Moats is a leader in the field of literacy. Just amazing, does amazing training, has developed programs, she's brilliant. So Louisa Moats is absolutely brilliant.
And a warrior.
One of the big going people right now is a man by the name of David Kilpatrick. And he has put out a number of different things. One is a manual that also contains great things around reading, but a big focus on phonemic awareness. And he and I studied under the same man, Phil McGinnis, who is the person, he's another person that had a huge impact on my life. It was through him that I learned about phonemic awareness back when people poo-pooed it, and I would go around and profess it and have people get angry at me. And but he was absolutely right. And the research showed us it's one of the best predictors of later literacy. So so the David Kilpatrick, Seidenberg, S-E-I-D-E-N-B-E-R-D, his book Language at the Speed of Light, another excellent person with great background stuff. I've just got these stacks of books. So those are just some of the.
Open the can of worms there.
Yeah,
No, beautiful can.
Go through tons of stuff around people that I think are amazing and have had an amazing impact on the field of literacy.
Awesome.
Candice, I had to write David Kilpatrick because he put Great Leaps in the same category as reading recovery, and oh yeah, it made me choke. But he was a gentleman, and I think all he knew of Great Leaps was from I call it the Guido Sarducci College of Learning, where you that's from Saturday Night Live, where you get 3 sentences of something and now you know all about it. And we're very, very small, but I like Kilpatrick's work a lot in phonological awareness. But in the world of behavior, like Candice, I really admire you, Eileen Marzola, and a number. Nancy from Utah, I can't think of her last name, from Utah. Is she from Utah? She's from the West.
Mathers, I don't know.
Nancy Mathers. Yeah. But they're coming from different philosophical perspectives than I, which is strong behavior, but not Nazi strong behavior. Some behaviors upset me, but you guys have been, in my career, able to see what I'm doing in behavior and learning and ameliorate it into the bigger picture. And see, that's been huge for me. For the Orton Gillingham people who suddenly see, like, hey, Ken's right, the flashcard stuff on high frequency words isn't generalizing. But if we put those same words into small bits of meaning, like I start working on not only high frequency words to extinguish all the errors, but I'm working on intonation and chunking at the same time. And see, this is the amelioration of two scientific fields. And right now, we're on the verge of a split and a war that disturbs me greatly, because we have a large enemy in the whole language perspective that wants to kill phonics, and we're allies. We don't see eye to eye on everything. And I just made the silly statement, yeah, that's called goose stepping. I don't do that. I'm constantly learning, but I'm not going to follow something absolutely proved wrong. So I'm going to learn from the Orton Gillingham people, as I hope they can learn and have learned from what we in behavior see, that, hey, the flashcards, one word at a time, doesn't cut it. I got better data. Isn't it all about better data and student performance, and that we grow beyond philosophy and into learning and getting better as instructors?
Yeah.
Yeah, that war has been going on for a long time.
Amen to that. I have to go.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Lavinia. I keep saying Rachel's iPhone. Hey, Rachel, who are you? Where are you from?
No, she said that it's Janet from Kentucky. She mentioned
Oh,
at
I
the
know you-
beginning here, but
Okay, Janet.
yeah.
Glad you're here.
We're running a little past that hour mark, so I just want to say, Candice, thank you so much. I had some
Oh,
really
wonderful.
good insights from you, and just in things that we can bring into our own tutors and techniques, like especially what you mentioned around anxiety, that the tapping is, I had heard of before with trauma, like you said, but I hadn't heard in this used in this context and stuff. So that's a fantastic tip for people.
Yeah,
And
really can be used anywhere. Like you're in the doctor's office waiting to have your blood pressure taken, start a little tapping, and it brings.
I don't know, is that cheating with your blood pressure? Is that gonna
Candice, is there a way you could do this for us to model it, not right now, but to model on like a Zoom where we can record it on what the tapping looks like, not only for a student, but for me or for Colin?
Tons of videotapes.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely digging into it. And
if you look up Nick Ortner, O-R-T-N-E-R, Nick Ortner, he's one of the big people on tapping, but people post stuff all the time. But he has a website that you can get regular things from. But
cool.
You thought YouTube would have a lot of tapping, and actually people that do guided tapping, which I don't do a lot of, but I just, again, use some of those techniques just with my students and myself. And as I said,
where it hits my brain, and I go back a while into sexually abused and incredibly abused children, we don't get much of what we get in the world of yoga and things like this are trite, incredibly trite, and yet you're now describing something to me that is teachable, impactable, and appears to be backed by the science, and is intriguing in my world of extreme abuse. Can we lower the anxiety of abused children through some relatively simple methods? And that's where I get really excited. And what I was asking you kind of to do, if we put someone else's YouTube on our website, are we violating copyright? But see, if you just tell us about tapping and all, and you do it, it's completely legal and it's in the language people understand, and it would take less than a minute. Yeah. But I think you brought up something powerful that we wouldn't have known about if you weren't our lead happy hour today.
Right, it's really up to people to research those things and then make decisions and around any of those different techniques, and you have to feel comfortable with it yourself and see what that does. So, it's just one thing I think for people to look at and think about, and I have found it really helpful. And so I think you know, any kids that have, and adults that have trauma or have come from a background of trauma, it can be really, really helpful.